My breath caught in my throat, sharp and painful like I had swallowed broken glass, when I opened the leather journal hidden behind the false panel in my mother's closet and saw the words that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. Your father has been living a double life, and I have known for 25 years. I was sitting on the floor of my childhood bedroom at 59 years old, surrounded by boxes of my mother's belongings, dust motes floating in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through the window she used to stand at watching for my father to come home. The house smelled the way it always had, like lavender sachets and old wood, and the faint ghost of her perfume that lingered in the curtains and carpets even 3 months after her death. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the journal, that old leather-bound book with the worn edges that I had seen on her nightstand my entire life, but had never been allowed to touch. She had always said it was private, personal, not for anyone else's eyes, and now I understood why. My mother Catherine had died of a stroke in February, sudden and unexpected at 78, collapsing in her garden while planting spring bulbs she would never see bloom. The grief had been overwhelming, the kind that makes you forget to eat and sleep, that makes ordinary tasks feel impossible. She had been my best friend, my confidant, the person I called every single day just to talk about nothing important and everything that mattered. We had been close in that special way mothers and daughters can be when they genuinely like each other, not just love each other out of obligation. Her death left a hole in my life that felt impossible to fill. My father Robert had taken her death hard, or so I thought at the time. He had cried at the funeral, delivered a eulogy about their 52 years of marriage that made everyone weep, talked about how she was his soulmate, and he did not know how he would go on without her. I had comforted him, worried about him, checked on him daily in the weeks after, trying to help him navigate his grief while managing my own. He seemed lost, diminished, a man whose entire identity had been wrapped up in being Catherine's husband, and who did not know who he was without her. The house had been left to me in my mother's will, the house where I had grown up, where I had learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where I had brought my own children to visit their grandmother, where decades of family memories lived in every room. My father had moved into a smaller condo after the funeral, saying the house was too big, too full of memories, too painful to live in alone. He had helped me start the process of sorting through my mother's things, deciding what to keep and what to donate. But then he had stopped coming, claiming it was too emotionally difficult, asking me to handle it without him. So I had been working through it alone, room by room, week by week, discovering the accumulated possessions of a woman who had lived 78 years, clothes that still smelled like her, jewelry that I remembered her wearing to church on Sundays, books with her notes in the margins, photo albums documenting a life that seemed happy and full and complete. Nothing had suggested secrets or pain or hidden truths. Everything had looked exactly like what it was supposed to be, the artifacts of a long and loving marriage, a life well lived, a family that had been blessed with stability and affection, until I found the diary, until I read those first devastating words, until the entire foundation of my understanding cracked open and everything I thought was solid turned out to be built on lies. The journal was dated, entries spanning from 1998 to just weeks before her death. 27 years of my mother's private thoughts, her fears and hopes, and the truth she had carried alone. I started reading with my heart pounding, sitting on that bedroom floor with my back against the wall, the afternoon light slowly fading as hours passed, and I moved through page after page of revelations that made me question everything. The first entry that mentioned the secret family was from June 1998. I was 32 then, newly married myself, pregnant with my first child, blissfully unaware that anything was wrong in my parents' marriage. My mother's handwriting was steady, controlled, the penmanship of a woman who had been a secretary before she married and never lost the skill of clear, precise writing. I discovered the truth today, she had written. Found the receipts Robert thought he had hidden. Motel rooms, restaurants in cities where he claimed to be on business trips, charges for women's clothing and jewelry that I never received. Confronted him this evening after dinner. He broke down, confessed everything. There is another woman, Linda, and 2 children, a boy and a girl, ages 7 and 5. He has been supporting them for years, living 2 separate lives. He says he loves me, says he cannot choose, says he will not leave either family. He begged me not to divorce him, not to tell our daughter, not to destroy both families. And God help me, I agreed. I do not know if I made the right choice, but I love him despite what he has done. I love our life together. I love being Sarah's mother and grandmother to the grandchildren that will come. I cannot destroy all of that. So I will carry this secret and find a way to live with it. I read that entry 3 times, 4 times, unable to process what it meant. My father, Robert Sullivan, the man I had idolized my entire life, the man who had coached my softball team and walked me down the aisle and held my babies with tears in his eyes, had another family, another woman who thought she was his wife or girlfriend or whatever she believed their relationship to be. 2 more children who called him dad, half-siblings I had never known existed. The entries continued, sporadic at first, then more frequent as years passed. My mother documented the pain of sharing her husband, the nights he was gone claiming business trips that she now knew were visits to his other family, the holidays he was mysteriously absent for part of the day, the phone calls he took in private, the way he would smell different when he came home sometimes, like someone else's house, someone else's life. But she also documented her choice to stay, her reasons for maintaining the lie. She wrote about not wanting to hurt me, not wanting to destroy my image of my father, not wanting to shatter the family stability that she believed I needed. She wrote about financial considerations. She had not worked outside the home in decades, had no independent income, would have struggled to maintain her lifestyle through divorce. She wrote about shame, about not wanting people to know her husband had betrayed her so profoundly, about the small town stigma of being the woman whose husband had a secret family. Most painfully, she wrote about still loving him, about the complexity of loving someone who has betrayed you, about the memories they had built over decades, about the man he was with her versus the man he was with Linda. She wrote about how he never stopped being affectionate with her, never treated her badly, always came back to her as his primary home and primary wife. She wrote about the twisted rationalization that let her accept this arrangement, that having part of him was better than losing him entirely, that their marriage still had value, even though it was built on a lie, that she could find peace in not knowing the details as long as the surface remained intact. I kept reading, trapped in my mother's private hell, watching her navigate 25 years of this double life. She documented birthdays where my father was absent. Now I understood why. Family gatherings where he left early or arrived late. Now I knew where he was going. The mysterious business trips that seemed excessive. Now I realized they were visits to his other family in a city 2 hours away. She also documented her detective work, the way she quietly gathered information about this other family over the years. Linda worked as a real estate agent, successful and independent. The boy was named Michael, the girl Emma. They lived in a nice house in the suburbs. Believed their father Robert worked as a consultant whose job required frequent travel and irregular schedules. They had no idea about us, just as we had no idea about them. 2 families existing in parallel, kept separate by a man who had enough charm and organizational skill to maintain both, and by a woman who loved him enough to let him. But little did I know, the revelations in that diary were just the beginning of understanding the full scope of my father's betrayal and my mother's quiet suffering. The entries grew more bitter as years passed. My mother's initial attempts at acceptance and rationalization gave way to resentment, anger, deep sadness about the life she had chosen or been forced to choose. She wrote about feeling like half a wife, about the loneliness of sleeping in a bed next to a man whose mind was often elsewhere, about the humiliation of maintaining a facade of marital happiness for friends and family while knowing the truth of her situation. She wrote about contemplating divorce multiple times over the years, about consultations with attorneys that she never followed through on, about the courage required to blow up your life at 60 or 65 or 70 years old. Each time she got close to leaving, something held her back. Fear of being alone in old age, attachment to the life and home they had built, concern about the impact on me and my children, the sheer exhaustion of starting over after so many years of accepting the status quo. She also wrote about my father's other children, about following their lives from a distance through social media and public records. Michael had gone to college, become an engineer, married young. Emma had struggled more, had issues with anxiety and depression that my mother wondered were connected to having an absent father who was never fully present. She wrote about feeling strange sympathy for these children who were innocent victims of their father's choices, about wondering if she should reach out to them, tell them the truth, free them from the lies that shaped their lives. But she never did. She maintained the secret, carried it alone, let both families live in their respective illusions, and she wrote it all down in this diary, this record of a life lived in the shadow of betrayal, this testament to complicated love and impossible choices, and the ways women of her generation were taught to endure rather than explode. The final entries, from the months before her death, were the most devastating. My mother knew she was declining, knew her time was limited even if she did not predict the sudden stroke that would kill her. She wrote about her regrets, not about staying with my father, interestingly, but about not telling me the truth sooner, about letting me live in ignorance, about the moment coming when I would discover this diary and have to process these revelations after she was gone and could not explain or comfort or help me understand. She wrote directly to me in these final entries, as if she knew I would eventually find the journal and read her words. "Sarah," she wrote in an entry dated January of the year she died, "if you are reading this, I am gone, and you have discovered the truth about your father. I am sorry. I am sorry for keeping this from you, for letting you believe in a marriage and a man that were not what they seemed. I am sorry for carrying this burden alone, when perhaps we could have shared it. I am sorry for the pain these words will cause you, but I want you to understand something. I made my choices consciously for my own reasons. Your father did not force me to stay. I stayed because I chose to, because the alternatives seemed worse, because I loved him despite everything, because I valued stability and comfort over truth and authenticity. I am not asking you to approve of my choices or to forgive your father on my behalf. I am only asking you to understand that life is complicated, that love is complicated, that there are no simple answers to why we tolerate what we tolerate. What you do with this information is your decision. You can confront your father, expose his secret, tell his other family the truth, or you can keep the secret as I did, maintain the status quo, let everyone live in their comfortable lies. There is no right answer. Only the answer that lets you sleep at night and look at yourself in the mirror with something like peace. I love you, my darling daughter. I have always loved you. You were the best thing in my life, the one thing about my choices I never regretted. Be strong. Be true to yourself in ways I was not always true to myself. And know that mothers carry many secrets to protect their children, even when that protection might be misguided. I finished reading just as darkness fell completely, sitting in my childhood bedroom with tears streaming down my face, feeling like I had lost my mother all over again, but also like I was meeting her for the first time. The woman in this diary was more complex, more human, more flawed and real than the saint I had been mourning. She was a woman who had made impossible choices in impossible circumstances, who had carried enormous pain with grace and dignity, who had loved imperfectly but deeply. And my father. What did I even think about my father now? The man I had idolized had been living a lie my entire adult life. He had another family, other children who called him Dad. He had deceived my mother, deceived me, deceived everyone who thought they knew him. Everything I believed about my parents' marriage was false. Every anniversary celebration, every tender moment I had witnessed, every piece of advice about love and commitment he had given me over the years, all of it was poisoned by this secret. I sat in that dark room for a long time, the diary in my lap, trying to decide what to do with this knowledge. My mother had left the choice to me, had explicitly said I could confront my father or keep the secret. But she had been wrong about one thing. There was no comfortable lie I could return to now. The knowledge couldn't be unknown. The truth had infected everything. changed how I saw the past, how I understood my family, how I related to my father. I drove home that night in a daze, the diary hidden in my purse like contraband. My husband James was waiting with dinner, concerned about how long I had been at my mother's house, worried about how the grief was affecting me. I could not tell him yet, could not speak the words out loud, could not make it real by sharing it. So I lied, said I had gotten lost in memories, lost track of time, was just tired and needed to sleep. He accepted this because he trusted me, because we had a good marriage built on honesty and transparency, because we were not like my parents. But I could not sleep. I lay in bed next to my husband, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through memories and reframing them all with this new information. Every time my father had missed a birthday party or left a holiday early, every mysterious business trip, every time he had been distant or distracted or claimed to be working late, all of it now suspect, all of it potentially evidence of his double life. I also thought about my half-siblings, these people I had never met who shared my DNA, who had grown up in a parallel universe believing their father was someone he was not. Michael and Emma. They would be in their 30s now, adults with their own lives. Did they still have a relationship with our father? Did they know about me? Had he kept them just as separate and secret as he had kept me from them? And what about Linda, this other woman who had been in my father's life for decades? Was she complicit in the deception, knowing he had another family? Or had he lied to her too? Told her he was divorced or widowed, maintained separate illusions for separate audiences. My mother's diary suggested Linda knew he was married, that she had accepted being the other woman, but I could not be sure without more information. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with finding out more. I used the information in my mother's diary to search online, to piece together the details of my father's secret family. It was surprisingly easy in the age of social media and public records. I found Michael Sullivan, engineer, married with 2 children of his own, living in the same city where his mother still lived. I found Emma Sullivan working as a graphic designer, unmarried, posting artistic photos and philosophical musings that suggested a creative soul dealing with inner struggles. I found Linda Morrison, not Sullivan, I noted. She had never married my father legally because he was already married to my mother. She was 74, still working in real estate, attractive and put together in her profile photos, with pictures of her children and grandchildren prominently displayed. Her social media included occasional posts about her partner Robert, never showing his face clearly, never tagging him, maintaining a curious privacy that now made sense. She knew he had another family. She had chosen to be the secret, just as my mother had chosen to keep the secret. But the biggest shock came when I dug deeper into my father's recent activities, because what I discovered made everything even more complicated and devastating. My father had not stopped seeing Linda after my mother's death. If anything, he had become more open about their relationship. His social media, which I had never paid much attention to before, showed recent photos of him with Linda and her family, celebrating holidays and birthdays, looking comfortable and domestic, and nothing like a man mourning his wife of 52 years. He had moved into that smaller condo not because the house was too painful, but because it was closer to Linda. He had stopped helping me sort through my mother's things, not because it was emotionally difficult, but because he was busy living his other life, the life he could now live openly without maintaining 2 separate households, 2 separate realities. My mother had been dead for 3 months, and my father had wasted no time transitioning fully to his other family. The grief he had displayed at the funeral, the tears and eulogy and claims of devastating loss, all performance. Or maybe not entirely performance. Maybe he had genuinely loved my mother in his way, but he had also been ready to move on, had a whole other life waiting for him, had mourned the required amount of time before returning to the family that had always been his secret priority. I felt rage building in me, hot and consuming and unlike anything I had felt before. Not just anger at my father for his betrayal, though that was certainly there, but anger at my mother for keeping this secret, for letting me grow up idolizing a man who did not deserve it, for choosing to protect him and his reputation over giving me the truth. Anger at myself for being so blind, so naive, so willing to accept the surface version of my family without questioning or looking deeper. But more than anger, I felt grief, because I had not just lost my mother 3 months ago, I was losing her again now, losing the version of her I thought I knew, learning she had lived a life of quiet suffering that I had been completely unaware of, and I was losing my father too, even though he was still alive, because the man I thought he was did not exist, had never existed. He was a stranger, a liar, someone I did not know at all, despite 60 years of believing I knew him better than almost anyone. I decided I needed to confront him, needed to tell him I knew the truth, needed to see how he would react when his carefully maintained secret was finally exposed. But I also needed more information first, needed to understand the full scope of his double life before I walked into that confrontation. So I did something I am not proud of, but felt necessary. I contacted his other family. I found Michael's email through his professional website. I sat at my computer for hours trying to compose a message that would not sound insane, that would communicate the impossible truth without completely destroying his understanding of his family. Finally, I wrote something simple and direct. My name is Sarah. I believe we are half-siblings. Our father is Robert Sullivan. I recently discovered that he maintained 2 separate families for decades. I am not contacting you to cause pain, but because I think we all deserve the truth. If you are willing to talk, please reach out. I sent the email before I could second-guess myself, then waited. For 3 days, there was no response, and I started to think Michael had dismissed my message as spam or the ravings of a crazy person. But on the 4th day, I received a reply that was just 4 words. We need to talk. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our cities, neutral territory where neither of us had history. I drove there feeling terrified and determined in equal measure, not knowing what to expect, how he would react, whether he would believe me or defend our father or simply walk away from the whole complicated mess. Michael was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, looking so much like my father that it hurt to see him. Same strong jaw, same hazel eyes, same way of sitting with perfect posture that suggested military training neither of them had actually had. He stood when I approached, shook my hand formally, and we sat across from each other like business acquaintances rather than siblings meeting for the first time. He did not waste time with pleasantries. "Tell me everything," he said. His voice was controlled, but I could hear the tension underneath, the fear of what he was about to learn. I told him the whole story, finding my mother's diary, the revelations about our father's double life, the 25 years of deception and parallel families. I showed him pages from the diary that mentioned him and Emma, showed him the evidence I had gathered, made it as factual and undeniable as possible. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly pained, his hands gripping his coffee cup so hard I thought it might shatter. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that shocked me. I think I always knew something was wrong. Not the specifics, not that he had another family, but that he was not fully present, not fully ours, not the father he pretended to be. There were always excuses, always reasons he could not attend school events or be there for important moments. My mother, Linda, she always defended him, said his work was demanding, said he loved us even when he could not show it. But Emma and I, we grew up feeling like we were not enough, like we were not important enough to make him stay. We talked for hours, comparing notes, piecing together the timeline of our father's deceptions. Michael told me about their family dynamics, about how Linda had always seemed sad underneath her bright exterior, about how their father would visit for a few days, then disappear for weeks, about the financial support that was generous but could not replace actual presence. He told me about Emma's struggles with feeling abandoned, about his own difficulties forming secure attachments in relationships, about the psychological damage of having a father who was there but not there, present but not present. And he told me something I had not known, something that changed everything again. Our father had not been faithful to Linda either. About 10 years ago, Michael had discovered evidence that Robert had been seeing other women, maintaining even more secrets, layers upon layers of deception that went beyond just 2 families. He had confronted his father, threatened to tell Linda, But Robert had denied everything, gaslighted him into questioning what he had seen, convinced him to stay quiet to protect his mother from more pain. Our father was not just a man who had made one terrible choice and maintained a double life. He was a serial cheater, a compulsive liar, someone who collected families and women like they were possessions to be managed rather than human beings with their own needs and rights to truth. My mother had been just one victim in a pattern of betrayal that probably extended back decades and touched many more lives than I had imagined. Michael and I agreed to tell Emma together, to contact Linda together, to finally expose the full truth of what Robert Sullivan had done. It would destroy the comfortable illusions both families had been living in, would create chaos and pain and difficult conversations, but it would also be honest, real, a foundation for building something authentic, even if it was built on the ruins of lies. But little did I know that my father had been keeping an even bigger secret, one that would explain his entire pattern of behavior and change how I understood everything. 2 days after meeting Michael, I went to see my father. I did not call ahead, did not warn him I was coming, just showed up at his new condo with my mother's diary in my hand and 30 years of questions demanding answers. He opened the door, looking relaxed and happy, a look that vanished the moment he saw my face and the book I was holding. "I know everything," I said, walking past him into his home without invitation. "I found Mom's diary. I know about Linda and Michael and Emma. I know you have been lying to all of us for decades. And I just met with Michael, so your other family knows now too. The secret is out, Dad. It is all coming apart." He stood frozen in his doorway, his face draining of color, aging years in seconds. "Sarah," he started, his voice shaking. "Let me explain." "There is nothing to explain," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded despite the rage burning in my chest. "You maintained 2 families for 25 years. You let Mom carry the weight of your lies. You let all of us believe in a man who did not exist. The only question I have is why? Why did you do this? How could you do this?" My father closed the door slowly, moved to sit on his couch like an old man, which he was 79 and finally caught. And then he told me something I had not expected, something that made me understand him differently, even though it did not excuse anything he had done. He told me about his childhood, about growing up in an abusive home, where his father beat his mother and his siblings regularly, where poverty and violence were constant companions, where escape seemed impossible. He told me about leaving home at 17, determined to create a different life, to be a different man, to build a family that was nothing like the one he came from. He told me about meeting my mother when they were both young, falling in love, getting married, trying to create the perfect family as a way of erasing his past. But he also told me about the pressure of that perfection, the weight of trying to be the ideal husband and father when he had no model for what that looked like, the fear that he was fundamentally broken and would eventually repeat his father's patterns. He told me about meeting Linda during a business trip when I was 7, about how she had understood him in ways my mother did not, about how he had felt torn between 2 women who each fulfilled different needs. The affair had started as a temporary thing, he said, something he meant to end. But Linda got pregnant with Michael, and he could not abandon his child the way he felt abandoned by his own father. So he made a choice. He would support both families, be present for both, create 2 separate perfect families instead of choosing one. It was selfishness, yes, but also an attempt to be there for everyone who needed him, to never be the abandoning father his own father had been. The rationalization was breathtaking in its narcissism. He had traumatized multiple families, created pain and insecurity, and lies for decades, but in his mind, he was being noble, being present, being the father he had never had. He could not see how his divided attention was its own form of abandonment, how his lies were their own form of abuse, how his inability to choose had forced everyone else to live in uncertainty and partial truth. "I wanted to be everything to everyone," he said, tears streaming down his face now. "I wanted no one to feel the pain I felt as a child. But I see now that I caused even more pain by trying to avoid hurting anyone. I destroyed your mother. I failed you and Michael and Emma. I created exactly what I was trying to avoid." His self-awareness came too late. accomplished nothing except his own catharsis. My mother was dead, unable to benefit from his belated understanding. Michael and Emma and I were adults, who had already been shaped by his choices, already damaged by his lies. And Linda, wherever she was in her own processing, had wasted decades on a man who would never fully commit to her. But then he told me the final secret, the one that reframed everything again. About 6 months before my mother died, he had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. The diagnosis was still preliminary, the progression uncertain, but the doctors had been clear that his memory and cognitive function would decline, that he had maybe 10 good years left if he was lucky. He had not told anyone except my mother, who had insisted they keep it private until they understood more about what they were facing. My mother's sudden death had derailed those plans, had left him navigating a terminal diagnosis alone, trying to decide what to do with the time he had left. He had chosen to spend it with Linda, with the family he had kept secret for so long, trying to make amends before his mind deteriorated, and he could no longer remember any of them. "That is why I stopped helping with your mother's house," he said. "That is why I have been distant. Not because I do not love you, but because I am trying to prioritize while I still can, trying to build what relationships I can before I lose the capacity for relationship. I thought I had more time to tell you about Linda's family, to bring everyone together, to try to create some kind of reconciliation, but you found the diary, and now we are here." I sat with this new information, trying to process it, trying to understand what it changed and what it did not change. My father was dying slowly, losing himself, facing the terror of disappearing while still alive. That was tragic, deserving of compassion, but it did not erase decades of lies. It did not repair the damage done. It just added another layer of complication to an already impossible situation. Over the next weeks, I coordinated with Michael and Emma, and we decided to have one family meeting, all of us together for the first time, both families finally in the same room. Linda agreed reluctantly. My father agreed because he had no choice, and Emma agreed even though she was terrified. We met at a neutral location, a community center conference room, all of us sitting around a table like we were negotiating a business deal rather than trying to repair relationships that had never had a chance to form properly. It was awkward and painful, and sometimes angry. Linda and I avoided looking at each other initially, both of us representatives of betrayal from the other's perspective. Michael and Emma were quiet, processing, trying to understand how they fit into this suddenly expanded family. My father looked small and old and scared, facing the consequences of his choices with nowhere left to hide. We talked for hours. We shared our perspectives, our pain, our confusion. We asked questions. Linda wanted to know if my father had loved my mother, if their marriage had been real or just performance. I wanted to know if Linda had known about us from the beginning, if she had been complicit or another victim. Michael wanted to know why he had not been enough to make our father choose, why he had always felt like a secret. Emma did not ask questions, just cried quietly, her fear and pain evident in every tear. My father tried to answer, tried to explain, but his explanations were inadequate. He loved both women, he said. Both families were real to him. He had not known how to choose. He had thought he could manage both. He had been wrong. He was sorry, so deeply, desperately sorry. His apologies meant nothing and everything. Nothing because words couldn't undo the damage, could not give us back the years of living in truth instead of lies. Everything because they were at least an acknowledgement, a recognition that he had caused harm, a taking of responsibility, even if that responsibility came too late to matter. What emerged from that meeting was not reconciliation exactly, but a kind of truth-based acceptance. We were all victims of my father's choices, including Linda, who had chosen to be part of the deception, but had also been lied to and used. We were half-siblings who had been denied the chance to know each other, to be family in real ways instead of secret ways. We were people connected by DNA and trauma, who had to decide whether that connection meant anything beyond shared pain. In the months that followed, something unexpected happened. Michael and Emma and I began building a relationship, tentative at first, but growing stronger as we got to know each other. We had more in common than just our father. similar sense of humor, similar values, similar wounds that made us understand each other in ways our friends could not. We started meeting regularly, having dinners, introducing our families to each other, creating the sibling relationship we had been denied. Linda remained separate, maintaining polite distance, still processing her own grief and betrayal. My father's relationship with all of us became strained as his Alzheimer's progressed, and he became more confused, more difficult, less recognizable as the man who had maintained such elaborate deceptions. Eventually, he needed memory care, and we all contributed to finding him a good facility, working together out of obligation and residual affection, even though none of us could forget what he had done. I spent a lot of time thinking about my mother during this period, rereading her diary, trying to understand her choices from a place of compassion rather than judgment. She had been a woman of her generation, raised to believe that marriage was forever, that women should be patient and forgiving, that protecting family image mattered more than personal happiness. She had made the best choices she could with the information and options she had. Those choices had cost her, but they had also allowed her to maintain the life she wanted, the relationship with me she valued, the dignity of not being publicly humiliated. I could not agree with her choices, but I could respect them as hers to make, and I could be grateful for the diary, for her decision to leave me the truth, even though it came after her death, even though it destroyed the comfortable illusions I had lived in. The truth was painful, but it was also freeing. It allowed me to grieve the real woman she had been rather than the saint I had imagined. It allowed me to understand my father as a deeply flawed human rather than the hero I had worshipped. It allowed me to build genuine relationships with my half-siblings based on shared truths rather than shared lies. 2 years after finding the diary, my father died in memory care, surrounded by all of us, me and Michael and Emma and Linda, his fragmented family finally together at the end. He did not recognize any of us by then, the Alzheimer's having taken his memories, his personality, everything that made him who he was. In some ways, it felt like he had died long before his actual death, the man I knew disappearing piece by piece until only a shell remained. His funeral was small and strange. We agreed on a brief service that acknowledged his complicated legacy. Without dishonoring him entirely, we let his grandchildren, all of them from both families, speak about the grandfather they had known, the moments of genuine connection that had existed within the lies. We told the truth in our eulogies, not the sanitized version most funerals feature, but the messy reality of a man who had loved imperfectly and hurt people while believing he was helping them. And then we went our separate ways, the 4 of us children of Robert Sullivan, connected forever by blood and betrayal, but also by our choice to transform that shared history into something meaningful. Michael and Emma and I had become genuine siblings, choosing to build relationships that our father's lies had prevented. Linda had found peace in her own way, accepting that she had been part of something wrong, but that she had also been a victim of manipulation and lies. As for me, I learned that family is complicated, that love is complicated, that truth is sometimes the most loving gift even when it destroys comfortable illusions. I learned that mothers carry burdens we can never fully understand, that fathers can fail spectacularly while believing they are succeeding, that hidden family secrets shape us in ways we do not recognize until they are exposed. I learned that inheritance is not just money and property, but also truths, painful, difficult truths that can free us if we are brave enough to face it. My mother's diary was the most valuable thing she left me, more valuable than the house or any possession. It gave me the truth about my family, about my father's betrayal, about her quiet suffering and impossible choices. It destroyed my illusions, but replaced them with reality. And reality, however painful, is always more solid ground to build on than lies. In the end, I learned that respect and love are not the same thing, that you can love someone while also acknowledging they hurt you, that elder wisdom sometimes means recognizing when the previous generation got it wrong and choosing a different path. My mother stayed with my father despite his betrayal, carried his secret to protect me and preserve our family. I understand her choice without agreeing with it, honor her sacrifice without repeating it. Have you ever discovered that your family was not what you thought it was? Have you ever learned that the people you most trusted were keeping secrets that would change everything? Have you ever had to decide whether to expose truths or maintain comfortable lies, and what that decision cost you?